welcome to a latest soldering video, and thanks for tuning in. In this one I'm going to go away from my normal PCB work. I'm going to show you a few different methods for joining two wires together. So I've got a few different sizes down here. I've got a few solder sleeves there that are quite a common sort of method for joining the wires. I've got some homemade solder sleeves here that I'll show you a neat method for making them if you haven't sort of got any sort of ready-made ones available. I've got some heat shrink. I'll show you how to fit that and the temperatures you sort of need. I've got my trusty little jig here for holding the wires while you're soldering them. If you haven't got one of them, it's not a problem. You can still do it on the desk. So yeah, hopefully throughout the sort of methods, there'll be one that is sort of useful to you. I'm going to start with quite an easy method where I just lay the wires next to each other, solder them up, and we shrink the sleeve over it. And that's the most common method that a lot of people would use. So we'll start off with that one, and then we'll progress through a few different methods. And at the end, I'll sort of show you how to make your homemade solder sleeves. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy the video and there's something useful for you. And so what we do, we get straight on the first method. So we'll do that one now. Right, so we're going to move on to method number one. This one's called a solder splice lap method. Now it's the most common method that a lot of people would use. So you start by stripping your wires about an equal amount. In this case I'm going to do about 10mm. Now I like to just sort of gently twist the strands for this one. It's not a necessity, but I think it'll aid you when you do the soldering on this this example. Now I like to add some external flux just along the wire. Again, it's something that's not sort of a necessity to do, just I think it will help the solder to go through the strands. And just get these tinned up. And then nicely tinned up. I'll just zoom in for this so you can see the joint better. This is where you want to pop your sleeving on. So because if the other ends of these two wires are going to an external source, you wouldn't be able to get the sleeving on. Right, so what I've done here, I've changed the sort of camera angle to give you a real close-up of the soldering process taking place. So as you can see, you've got two sort of separate wires. I've tinned both of them, and basically I've just laid them next to each other. And this is the most common method that sort of lots of people would use. Really easy. I just add sort of a slight bit of flux, external flux over the joint. The solder's, like I say, it's actually got flux built in, but I always like to add a bit of external to make it sort of go nice and really easy. And basically just put your iron on top and sort of melt both the tin legs together. And you will end up with a really nice sort of joint soldered all round. And like the other methods, I will sort of always remind you there is flux on here. It's basically a non-corrosive flux I use. You can clean it off if you really want to, but for this sort of video I'm not going to. Yeah, and basically just push your sleeving on, and yeah, just get that shrunk down. Now I've got basically my heat gun set to about 180 degrees. Just try and zoom that. And so yeah, what I'll do now, just get my heat gun onto the sleeving. Now if you haven't got a heat gun, you can, I've seen people sort of do it, you can get a lighter, sort of shrink your sleeving. Some people would sort of run a soldering iron along the joint, and that would sort of also shrink the sleeving. But if you can get a heat gun, sort of does a multitude of jobs, so it's worth getting one. You can also work on your PCBs with it, sort of remove components, etc. So yeah, it's a good item to have. So as you can see, the sleeving's gone nicely down right along the whole length. Always try and move your gun along the whole length. Don't sort of concentrate on one area. You'll get a consistent, nice, even shrinkage right along. So that's gone sort of nicely down, like you can see. So what we do, I'll just turn that around so you can sort of see the shrinkage. So yeah, so you've got a nice sort of a nice joint, nicely sleeved, and that's called the solder splice lap joint. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to move on to another solder splice method, similar to this, but it's going to have an extra wrap around the middle for sort of more stability. So move on to that one now. Coming on to method number two, this is again, it's very similar to the last one, but this one's going to have an extra wrap around the middle. So again, I've stripped it as before and placed the wires next to each other, but I'm not going to tin it this time. What I've got here is some tin copper wire. And what you want to do now is just go round and round the sort of joint for about 6 or 7 turns. And just for the sake of the video, I'm going to speed it up slightly. I've already prepared this one. As you can see, I've got a wrap right round the middle with that tin copper, and that's what this one is. It's basically the same as the last one with an extra wrap round the middle. So what I've done here, I'm using a different camera angle just so you can see a really clear sort of detail of how this method sort of looks. So you've got your the two wires laid next to each other with your sort of few turns of tin copper wire going around them. If you've got really thick wires, you can use sort of thicker tin copper wire. But yeah, this is quite a thin sort of wire, so I'm using about 28 gauge tin copper wire to go round this. So what I'll do again, I'm going to pre-flux this slightly. Just add a little bit of sort of along the joint underneath. So this just aids the soldering, or the solder to go right through the joint. And we basically get this soldered up as before. So again, just lay your iron on there. Just keep feeding it in. So this one will take a short while because it's got to go right through the joint. So you've got a nice sort of detail there of what the joint should look like. Now, as you can see, there is some flux sort of remaining on there, but the flux I use is non-corrosive, so it should, it won't do any damage to the joint. And what I can do, just get this shrunk down. Just going to zoom out slightly just so to shrink. So yeah, we'll get this shrunk down like the other methods before. So again, about 180 degrees. And just gently, just shrink it down right along the length of the joint. So it's a really good method. This gives the sort of first method that I showed just a bit more stability. So there you go, started to go right along the whole length of the joint. So we've got a nice even shrinkage right along. As you can see, you can see where it's slightly dipped there. That's where the joint sort of starts, about there, and it's the same there where it ends. So that's basically the solder spliced sort of wrap method. Basically a lap method with an extra wrap round the middle. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to move on to the sort of next option, and that one's going to be basically a similar method to this, but instead of sort of twisting the wires together, or like with the wrap, I'm just literally going to push them together to sort of weave the strands, and that one's called a solder splice mesh method. So we'll move on to that one now. We'll move on to the third of the solder splice methods. This one's called a solder splice mesh. Again, strip an equal amount of both wires. Again, I'm going to do about 8 to 10 millimeters. As you can see, I've got a nice equal amount. So we'll pop the first one in the jig. Again, I'm going to pop my heat shrink on at this stage. So yeah, if you don't, you might sort of maybe regret it when you come to get it on there. Okay, you can just sort of gently tweak these apart, interweave the strands, and then squeeze it all back together. Don't want to do no twisting with this method. It's literally a case of just interlocking the strands, just squeezing it all round. With the previous methods, I've sort of zoomed in here. I've changed the camera angle so you can get a really sort of close look at what's going on. So basically, I've just pushed these two wires together. You can sort of see the ends of the other wire coming from sort of to there. I've done the same the other end. So these are basically pushed together and squeezed up with no twisting involved. Just basically, yeah, it's called a mesh method. Quite a good option. So again, just add me flux. That'll aid the sort of solder going through. You can just get that soldered up basically, same as the other methods. So yeah, it's like I say, it's another good option. Pretty simple to do. So we just get this soldered up. So again, you've got to feed the solder just so it sort of runs through the strands. It's going to go right around the back as well. You can see it sort of going through the joint. Again, on there you can see the flux that's sort of remaining. But again, as in the other methods, if you want to clean the flux off, not a problem. But it's non-corrosive, so it won't do any damage. And so yeah, so let's get this this shrunk down. As in, yeah, same as the other ones. So basically you want your heat gun, well I've got my heat gun set to about 180 degrees again, and we'll get this sort of shrunk down. You should get a nice neat joint. Just run it right along the sleeving again. Heat shrink comes in sort of various types. Sort of the shrinkage ratio varies, so yeah, just make sure you get one that sort of shrinks to what you need. As you can see, it's starting to go right along the length of the whole joint. So it's quite a good option this. I've used it plenty of times. It's good if you need to get these, or if you've got wires that you need to get apart fairly easy in the future without cutting them. This is quite a good option for that. So that's pretty much shrunk that down. So there you go, that's called solder splice mesh method. So that's the last of the solder splice methods I'm going to show you. I'm going to move on now to a hook joint. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy that one and find that useful. And I'll move on to that one now. Right, so following on from the solder splice methods, I've come to this hook method. Basically, just for the sake of the video, I'm going to take you through this in stages. So what I've done here, I've pre-stripped these, they're about 1 inch back, and I've sort of twisted them up and bent them back. It's a very good method for single core wire. This is stranded, but it still works really well. So this is the first stage, get them to that sort of shape. Yeah, like I say, just for the sake of the video, I'm going to take you through this in some sort of little demos that I've done, and yeah, we'll take you through in stages. So the second stage is basically hooking through in the middle. I've twisted one back on itself, as you can see there, and all you've got to do then is repeat the other side. You'll end up with this finished, yeah, the finished article basically. As you can see, they're hooked through the middle, twisted back on themselves, and that's ready now to solder. So it's a very strong method. It's going to give it good stability. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to transfer it to the jig, then I'll sort of choose a different camera angle, and yeah, we'll get this one soldered up, and yeah, you should see a good result. So we'll do that bit now. Right, so I've transferred this to the solder jig and changed the camera angle. So as you can see, you've got the hook right in the middle where they're sort of yeah, they're linked up, and I've sort of twisted the wires back on themselves. So again, for this method, as all the others, I'm just going to add some external flux. There's quite a lot of little loops on this and twists where you want the solder sort of to get into all the gaps. So just, the solder has got sort of the flux in it, but like I say, I always like to add a sort of some external flux to aid the process. Then you can just start soldering it up basically. This one's going to take a little while because obviously there's quite a few gaps to fill. So yeah, you just want to sort of go along it, feed the solder all the time, and it will eventually find every sort of little gap in the join. So as you can see, that's gone right around every detail on that join. You can still see the external flux I've added up the end, but yeah, if you want to clean it off you can, but for this, yeah, just for the sake of the video, I'll sort of leave it on for this one. So you just slide the sleeving over, so you want it going off the end, the other end as well. So that's got that right along the whole length. Now I'll just get this shrunk up. So I've got the same temperatures again. So it's a really neat method this, very strong, because they're sort of, you know, really well linked in the middle. And yeah, it's a good option. So just keep transferring your heat right along, keep moving it all the time. Don't want to concentrate on one area too long. So this way you just get a nice even join. As you can see, I've got no big bulges too bad coming out of any side. And yeah, basically let's give you a really neat sort of join right along. As you can see, I've got it tight to the end of the sort of cable all the way, and you can see the sort of, yeah, you can see the sort of twists in it, sort of round there and round there as it's sort of twisting round itself. So basically that's the hook method. So yeah, it's a good option. So yeah, what I'm going to do now, I'll put a few photos up of the ones I've shown so far, and then yeah, I'll move on to some solder sleeve methods, and I'll show you how to make your own solder sleeves. So yeah, well, after the pictures I'll move on to them two options. So I'll put the pictures up now. So following on from the solder, splice and the hook methods, we come on to these solder sleeves. Now at the back I've got 3 ready-made solder sleeves that are easily available from a lot of electrical retailers. Yeah, you've got your solder sort of in the middle where the red sort of colour is, and up the end you've got a bead of glue. And yeah, if you haven't got any sort of ready-made ones, you can easily make your own. I'll give you a little sort of demonstration at the end how to make these, and I'll sort of show you both of these methods sort of being used on the wires. So yeah, both options work really well. So like I say, if you haven't got any of the ready-made ones, you can easily make your own. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to show you how to use these ready-made ones, and after that I'll show you a demonstration on the homemade ones. So we'll move on to the first method now. So move on to the first of the solder sleeve methods. These are the pre-made sleeves that yeah, sort of ready available from a lot of electrical retailers. So basically what I've done, I've lined up the centre band, that's the red band, that's the one, that's the solder part of these sleeves, and up the end you've got a sort of bead of glue at each end. Yeah, so basically strip your wires equal, put the band in the middle, and then yeah, away you go with a heat gun. Now it all depends on the temperatures of your heat gun, sort of what the solder makeup of is inside. It's, you know, lead free, sort of low melt or leaded. So basically just experiment with yeah, what you need. I put some silver foil just below it, so my heat gun hasn't got a lot of heat shield to sort of push the heat back. So yeah, so I've just literally used silver foil, does the same sort of job. And just basically concentrate in the centre, and you should see that go. Starts to go shiny, it should go right along the joint. There we go, it's already gone, nice and shiny, gone right along the joint. And that's basically what you're looking for. So it's a great method, it worked really well. And yeah, so if you can't get this method, basically you can make your own, like I sort of showed you at the start. Now all that's coming out at the end, you see the glue sort of popping out at the end. The sort of cable itself is perfect, no damage. So it's a good method. They're pre-made, come in all different sizes. So yeah, like I say, if you can't get these, you can make your own. And that's where I'm going to go now. I'm going to sort of show you the homemade ones, and yeah, show you how they go. So move on to that one now. Let's come on to the stage now, where I'm just going to show you how you can sort of do some homemade solder sleeves if you haven't got any of the pre-made ones available. Very simple method. What you're looking for, I've just found a sort of watchmaker screwdriver. You're looking for, yeah, some slight movement around the outside of the tool you're going to use to wrap the solder, just so the solder, when it's sort of wrapped, it's still going to fit snugly into the sleeving. So for this one, I'm just going to do 3 or 4 turns, keep them quite tight. Just trim the leads off. Just pull it off the screwdriver now and trim the other side. So just get that one trimmed up. And the best way to do this, just pop it down on the desk or whatever surface you got. And just push it in basically. And you can, yeah, just sort of work it into the middle. And there you have it. You've got a nice fillet of sort of bead of solder, a few sort of turns in the inside, and that's going to sort of do you a good job. So I'm going to do a demonstration later how these work. Hopefully you can see sort of how useful they are. So if you haven't got any pre-made ones, you know, these could help you out in the future. So yeah, I'll move on to the next stage and say I'll do a demonstration on this one later. So we finally move on now to the homemade sleeves, and yeah, see how this one shrinks down. So as you can see, I've got me wrap round solder in the middle. It's, yeah, it's a little bit sort of blurry this because you've got to look through the sleeving. So yeah, let's see how this goes. Now depending what solder you put in the middle, you just have to experiment with the heat you need. But yeah, I've got silver foil sort of put behind it, so my heat gun hasn't got a deflector, so that should sort of bounce the heat back, enable it to sort of melt quicker. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. I've got the ends done, just concentrate on the solder in the middle. You should see it sort of flow along. I can see it already going, and yeah, quite a good result. There we go, you've got solder going right along the joint, and that's what you're looking for. So it's that easy. So yeah, basically that's it's a really good method, the homemade ones. So if you're ever stuck and you haven't got any of the pre-made ones, easy make your own like I showed you earlier, and yeah, it should be good to go. So anyway, that wraps these videos up for this one. So what I'll do, I'll put a few more pictures up, and yeah, hopefully you can join me in the future when I do some more. So thanks a lot for your time, and yeah, good luck with all your projects. I'll see you soon. Thank you.